The banning of minority religious clothing, the closure of places of worship, demands that religious leaders of a minority community sign a charter of state values, calls for state-sanctioned and edited religious texts, creating state-run forums on reshaping an entire religion and its practice, the promotion and propagation of racist imagery attacking said communities, and around 70% of inmates thought to be represented by a minority religious demographic. Our immediate reaction may be, are we talking about China's forced sinicization of Uyghurs in the name of de-radicalization? Our immediate reaction would not be, oh, we're talking about France. France in the American imagination is linked to revolution, the intellectual basis of nation building. It is the cradle of modern Euro-American civilization, art, architecture, food, film, fashion, drink. But what if we saw France for what it is? Not a country torn apart by a secular versus religious war, but a country that has failed to create a nation for all of its citizens. How different would our news coverage of France and its Arab and Muslim populations especially look then? Would we be covering a civilizational clash or a country that practices a two-tier citizenship? Well, news coverage will focus and expand on a very clear line the French state itself has made amongst its population between the French and the immigrants. Our coverage often relies on the French state's insistence through rhetoric and policy that the issue the country faces result overwhelmingly from a resistance to integration. The attack on Charlie Hebdo, a magazine also renowned for its racist and crass depictions of Black and Arab people, became an attack on the bedrock of Western civilization, on free speech, and the slogan Je suis Charlie became a rallying hashtag and symbol of solidarity. Which line of interrogation should journalists take? Because there is a long history of French antipathy towards Muslims, toward Islam, that underlies not only contemporary French identity by design, but also the treatment of French Muslims as second-class citizens.
So I think if we see French colonialism as something that's important to how the French state operates right now, and surely many things have changed in the French state's logic in how it manages and governs Muslim communities, but nevertheless there was this notion that Frenchness and Islam were somehow in contradiction.
A key defining feature of France's colonialism was assimilating colonized populations to French values, culture, beliefs deemed superior, and that included for its Muslim colonial subjects to drop their Islamic beliefs and Muslim identity in order to be embraced as French. And the bodies of women have played a long and central role in France's attempts to push a very specific way of being and remaining French, especially on its Muslim citizenry.
The trope of getting women to take off the veil has a really long history in French colonialism. In Western media, we often see or read that people like Marine Le Pen or Éric Zemmour are racist, that these are people on the far right, and that this is the problem. And certainly, I agree that Marine Le Pen and Éric Zemmour pose a real threat to civic liberties in France, but that shouldn't lead us to overlook the threat that people like Macron also pose. I think it's really important for Americans to see Macron not as a kind of liberal Democrat as we might see the Democratic Party, but to understand that Macron's policies have been denounced by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, and that this question of Islamophobia in France is also one of creeping